Well, I actually had a chance to ask her.
Ready?
So I'm keeping this.
That's good.
All right, good evening, everyone. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I need a motion to approve the agenda for the budget meeting of March 4th, 2024.
Kelly?
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. We have the open forum. The Greenville Central School District wishes to facilitate public access to meetings of the Board of Education and provide an opportunity for public comment at these meetings. Accordingly, the open forum provides an opportunity, and I'm going in and out. Let's see, for members of the public to share thoughts about topics on the agenda. An individual's comments shall be limited to 5 minutes. Additionally, comments may be emailed to the district clerk, Daphne Pearson, using the email pearsond@greenvillecsd.org. In order for an email to be read during the meeting, it must be received by 4 p.m. You want to switch? Thank you. All right, this sounds better. In order for an email to be read during the meeting, it must be received by 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting and state that the email is to be read out loud. Emails shall be limited to 600 words. Please note that this is not the time to register complaints that need to be addressed confidentially through the proper channels. Remarks that might be considered defamatory, obscene, profane, stigmatizing, or otherwise impermissible in public forums are prohibited and will be declared out of order. Board members actively listen during the open forum, but may not immediately respond to comments. Is there anyone that would like to speak? Do we have any emails?
I do not.
Okay, then I am going to move us on to the presentations, and we have a capital project update by SEI Design Group and Schoolhouse Construction. So, come on up, please.
Yeah, so we'll, excuse me, welcome Mike Houlihan from Schoolhouse, Greg Wilbur also from Schoolhouse, Joanne Vogel and Matt Schools, you know, from SEI. Will come up and give us the latest and greatest. We have delivered much of this information already to our stakeholders, the groups, small groups that we've worked with of teachers as we created the design that have gone into the state ed. So we've met with them, we've met with the District Facilities Committee and gave them a bit of an update. So tonight the board will get an update, the board will get more, a lot's kind of happened in the last week or so, and even some more news today. Won't steal anybody's thunder as we get into that, but Mike, you want to start us off with a quick run through of what we're looking?
Sure thing, thank you. Okay. Forgive me, I'm not used to using a microphone, apparently. So just to run through the agenda that we have on the screen here. To start, we're going to go through an update of the SCD approval status for the project, and then we'll do an overview of some of our pre-construction documents, mainly focusing on scheduling and also logistics. And then we'll also touch on our financial position from a budgetary perspective. And then lastly, we'll wrap it up with some renders, 3D renders of the new additions at the high school and the elementary school put together by SEI. So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I think that's a good place to start.
All right, I'm gonna get the SED stuff over with here off the start. So the state, the facilities planning at SED issues the permits for any construction. So we've obviously developed the design and put together permit documents and submitted them. So we submitted them September 12th. And from that point to now, we've been sort of waiting for them to review it. We have had some correspondence earlier this year about the aid eligibility of the additions associated with the project. As you know, early in the project development, we explained that although we feel that additional classrooms spaces are warranted, SED standards have sort of larger classroom populations in them. So for instance, your elementary school, the state would not look at it as you need more space. They see your building as large enough. So we had a few hurdles to get through in order to, as you know, develop additions for each building and justify them to the state. So we put together compelling arguments, and through the first couple of months of this year, we essentially went back and forth with the folks that make the decisions at the state, and at the end of the day, they granted essentially the maximum that we could have hoped for aid, so that's a huge win. But obviously, we needed that part done for them to actually issue a permit. Since then, we've continued to wait in line. Actually, on Friday, the architectural review that does a technical review of the project picked up our project, so I alerted the district that something's happening. It's been, several months, so something happening is great news. Today we actually got the comments back from architectural, and that again is really good news. There's just a few comments. It looks just at first blush, because we just got them. I literally opened it while I was in my car in your parking lot and looked at it quickly because I had to know, but it looks like something that in a couple of days we can have the answers, and I don't think there's going to really be any back and forth on this one, so that will be great. So in addition to the architectural review, there's an engineering review, so to review the electrical and the HVAC systems. That one, same deal. It's in a queue. We have not gotten those comments. They're running on average about a week behind the construction or architectural review. So while we're getting this architectural review settled, we're likely to hear the comments on the engineering review. So progress being made. I mean, when we went into for permit in September, they were reporting a 14-week turnaround. That was their high-end estimate for projects at the time. Now it's more like 24 to 26 weeks. So we've waited the 24 weeks, and we're in the middle of that. So we lost 10 weeks from where we thought we were. But not all is lost. We're still in good shape. We are aware of a lot of projects in the area that have yet to even come out of SED and be bid. So we're cautiously optimistic that we will have a good bid environment, and we'll have some sort of attractive project elements for contractors to come after here in Greenville. Let me see. That's it. If there's no questions on the SED, I'll let Mike get back up here with the pre-construction.
Thank you, Matt.
So on the screen here, we have our milestone schedule. This is a document that we put in the project specifications and essentially holds contractors to start completion dates. These are still working draft documents, just so you're aware. We can still change things before they're put into the bid documents per any feedback from the district or their respective groups. Essentially, you have your descriptions of work there, and it's outlined by building. So here we're looking at the elementary school, and like I said, you have the respective start and completion date that we have scheduled out here. I'm not going to spend too much time going through each item here. We do have a phasing plan, which basically represents all of these items in a graphic on the drawings. So Todd, if you want to flip to the next page, that's the second page where we have the middle high school work on there. And then the last page of the milestone is some footnotes, CYA if you will. And if you could move on to the phasing plan, thank you. So this is the elementary school. Here we have highlighted the most disruptive, if you will, obviously, is the addition and the conversion to the new music suite. And so we've got the addition work breaking ground starting beginning of June this year. And then the music room, the conversion to the music suite would start taking place this summer as well. Just gonna open up my page. This is a little out of order, don't know why. So in the bottom right hand of the screen here, you can see the orange highlight here is where we're putting a new propane tank, which you currently have an existing fuel tank for your heating system. So we are doing a conversion to a new heating system or fuel source, if you will, and we're looking to attain the underground propane tank installation along with the trench over the course of this summer. And that's basically just going to expedite the conversion process come the following summer. And that's mainly due to lead times with the boilers. A lot of mechanical equipment we're seeing has extensive lead times, and with us going to bid this spring, we certainly wouldn't have that equipment in time. So we're planning for the conversion to happen summer of 2025. On the top left, highlighted in blue in the parking lot, we are removing the existing fuel tank and just filling it back in with asphalt. So that's obviously set for the summer of 2025 after the conversion occurs. Now moving into the interior of the building of the elementary school, we have the UPK classrooms renovations taking place this summer. And then also highlighted is the addition work, as I said, would be starting in beginning of June. And then there's also some structural work under the new music wing there. Moving to the first floor, bottom left hand of the page, the areas highlighted in orange, we're looking at attaining over this summer. And then the areas highlighted in blue will be taking place, light blue, sorry, will be taking place summer of 2025. Again, this is kind of a mirror image of the last page, the first floor. This is now the second floor. One thing I didn't call out on the last one, in the top part of the page, highlighted in yellow, is some casework and sink replacements that we have scheduled to take place this summer. Here we're looking at the roofing. The roofing at the elementary school is something we would look to have occur this summer. So that pretty much wraps it up for the elementary school schedule. Now we have the high school. This is obviously a critical area here where we are essentially chopping into one of the existing art rooms and building out a whole new art room. So the area highlighted in orange we have taking place this summer, and it's critical that we have that art room in a place where we can turn it over to the district by the end of the summer. So it is a fast-tracked endeavor, if you will, but we do have that taking place this summer for the area highlighted in orange there. Again, we've got the two art rooms there highlighted, and then on the bottom right-hand side, we've got the areas highlighted in yellow. To the right is the band room, which is really just abatement of the flooring and new flooring going back in. And then in the shop classroom there, we're doing some HVAC upgrades. You'll see that the one purple highlight there has some lines going diagonal. That's called out as an alternate, and that is the air handling units that would be going on top of the cafeteria / auditorium. And like I said, that is being bid as an alternate. Here's the roof plan for the middle high school, and we do have these two roofs on the left-hand side highlighted in blue being bid as alternates currently, is what we intend.
And can you just briefly explain the alternate process or how things are decided, so if anyone's watching the video or anything, they're clear about that?
So essentially, I mean, we work together with SEI, the design team, and also the district to identify scopes of work that could take place at a later time. That may be dependent on the building condition survey that's done, and it also serves as a tool so that come bid day, it really protects the bid. If it's an unpredictable environment, if bids come in high, we have essentially a safety valve to now still move forward with a project, but you might not just get all of the work that you were looking to get done. So it's usually items that it's like, yeah, we want to do this, but we can live without it and plan for a future.
I'll say one thing, Mike.
So on the alternates, we're really dealing with a couple of different kinds. If you remember back when we're conceiving of the referendum, there actually are referendum alternates that, based on early design discussion, conceptual discussion of the scope and budget as we were building the project, we weren't confident that the total referendum amount would actually cover all of our sort of wishes and needs. So to the voters went a referendum that had a base project scope and then a few alternate project scopes. The things we wanted, but we couldn't guarantee to the public that we could afford them come now, essentially. So all of those items that you see if you if you review the banner that we had for the vote, you'll notice that the alternates that are listed there are alternates now in the bid. And as Mike was saying, there's also bid protection alternates. So we go into construction phase on a project that has an existing building and lots of unknowns, because our investigation isn't exhaustive to get into walls and underfloors and dig in the ground extensively to find all the unknowns. We're going to go into a 2-year construction, and we're going to have to set aside a healthy sum of money. That's money that we want to spend on construction, but we can't commit it right now because it would be irresponsible to not have some money in your pocket to set aside for the unknowns. So the bid alternates kind of go hand in hand with that. We'll create enough bid alternates from the scope we want to do to represent enough money to be that sort of contingency fund in case something comes up. And what happens in most cases, nothing real drastic happens during construction, and then you have that pot of money at the end of the project that you then recommit to construction, and you get some of those things that you made bid alternates now. Obviously, it'll be an active process. It's been an active process to identify alternates, and it'll be an active process to prioritize and reprioritize what the most important things when it comes down to bid time. And we have some of the money unknowns behind us. We can then make decisions on the items that we made alternates that are very important. They get awarded right away. Some that can wait maybe until the end of the project when we know we're more financially stable. Those we may hold and potentially award them in a year, and while we're still in the construction phase.
On the screen here is a logistics plan for the elementary school. It basically spells out where the contractors can lay down their materials, trailers, construction fencing, temporary walkways, and things of that nature. And this is the same thing for the middle high school. And then here this is a logistics plan, more so focusing on areas where contractors could park and again lay down some trailers. So I think before we go into the 3D renders, we'll just briefly touch on our financial position here. So overall, we feel we're in a good position financially, and that's mainly based on the estimate that we received from our third-party estimating firm. And as we were just discussing, we have identified several alternates in working with the district and SEI, which helps further protect the bid, so that we do have a successful bid opening come bid day, and we can move forward with the project. Another thing I'll add is that we have pursued certain scope of works that are available via cooperative purchasing agreement and or state contract. I'll name a couple: roofing and casework that we've engaged, and we've sent out RFPs for and got pricing on. We're still evaluating whether we will proceed with going those routes, but either way, in the end, it's really helpful to have those numbers as we go into bid. In case bids do come in high, we can fall back on that, and we do have that work separated out as an alternate. So it's just another way to protect ourselves. Matt, would you like to add anything to that?
No, unless there's any questions.
Yeah, any questions
where we
there?
stand, that's pretty much the story.
Thanks. I have a few questions. First, you said position looks good based on information from your third-party estimator. As compared to when the project cost was originally estimated a few years ago, how have prices changed? Has there been much of an increase?
Yes, I mean, since a few years ago, there's been a significant increase. Our estimator gets several sets of the plans, so the last plans they received were the plans that were submitted to SED. And being that they haven't received any significant comments, I'd say we're, in good line. We align well with that estimate, so.
Okay.
Can I just, for a quick second, just try to clarify that? When we were giving estimates and folks at SEI were going back over the drawings and stuff, part of what they do is they inflate certain aspects based on what they're, correct me if I'm wrong,
Yes, no,
anticipating what the inflation of these things are going to be, what the costs are going to be. So the question is, did we stay within what we thought those costs were going to balloon to a year or so ago when we put this stuff in?
That's right.
Yeah.
Inflation probably increased by more than, well, most people estimated. Even though it's coming back down now, I don't know how the timing of your original estimates lined up with kind of where those costs are now.
We don't have that exact information, I apologize, but we can tell you that
Qualitatively.
the current estimate as it stands right now, compared to the referendum number, we're in a good position. We're actually under that budget number as compared to where we were a few months ago, and that answers to the question about alternates too. What that estimate is currently helps inform the team what alternates we want to look at, what alternates need to be considered, and it's a budgetary concern as well.
Okay, thanks. And just a couple more. One, my understanding is that it would be in the bid documents that are issued where you request information. Well, let me start over. To the extent that you can consider energy efficiency measures in this capital project to help us save on energy costs longer term. My understanding is that that would go into the bid documents to request that as part of a response. Just can you elaborate on kind of, I guess, how that's incorporated?
Sure.
Where we might
Come back.
see, that being considered?
Yeah, I mean, what we have as sort of the meat of the project is not a huge opportunity for energy savings, but everything that we have as requirements for the contract are, you know, obviously meet or exceed energy code standards, and the systems, you know, we're balancing through the economy of the price of systems with the energy efficiency. So, I mean, your schools are filled with, you know, unit ventilators, for example, which are not the most efficient systems, but they're cost effective. And, you know, we don't necessarily have the budget to do a wholesale change on how the mechanical systems work in the buildings. So we're not, you know, we can get energy efficient systems, but they're not, you know, these are not the most energy efficient items. And so what we do have is we have a little bit of low hanging fruit for energy efficiency, but this is, I don't want to paint a picture. This project is flooded with opportunities for grants and the like. We're always hunting for those things, and the requirements in the documents will be consistent with any grants that we may be eligible for. But it's not going to be like huge dollars. It's just going to be as energy efficient as we can make it based on the systems we're actually touching.
Right, I understand that the opportunities are potentially limited, both in terms of the systems or equipment you're working with, and, you know, given the trade-off of the cost. Even if, you know, this may be a longer payoff period if you do something that's a little more expensive at the outset. I know that doesn't mean we can just do it. The interest really is just making sure that it's considered now as we're putting new stuff in, and to the extent that it fits within the scope and budget that it, you know, is considered. So what I think not hearing, I'm making an assumption, so please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's not necessarily called out specifically in the bid documents. You know, to the extent that you can, you know, give us a proposal within the budget that includes energy efficiency measures, do so. It's just if someone wants to take the initiative to do that.
No, the systems that are designed are the systems that we're asking for in the bid. So as long as we're sort of within the public bid protocol to accept equals to what we specify, the items that are what we specify or are equal to what we specify will meet our energy efficiency goals on the project, and that's just plain dictated in the project, and the contractor needs to deliver. The energy efficiency has been part sort of the constant dialogue of the project, and I don't know, Joanne, if you have any notes from recent conversations with engineers about what may be.
So when we brought up the specific question that you had given us, you know, the last meeting, we were told that a lot of times if there's grants or if there's money that we can get, we have to wait until after it's bid, and then that's when these things will kind of reveal themselves and should be brought to us, bring them to the engineers, and then we'll apply through those programs. But a lot of them are not available until something is being built. But I was going to throw out one thing that even though we're not putting in like the highest efficiency system, for example, at the gym at the elementary school, we have a 2-story space for storage, and we're putting one of the units inside, and that should give us at least 10 more years on the life cycle of that unit. So we're trying to get as many of those types of things in as possible.
Okay, one follow-up and then just one other quick question, Jim, and then I'll pipe down. The follow-up is, you mentioned the energy efficiency goals for the project. What are those?
I mean, obviously, as I mentioned, the meeting or exceeding the energy code and specifying equipment that that we're comfortable with, that has a decent longevity, and obviously is meeting the energy efficiency goals that we apply to projects. I would have to defer to my engineers to get onto the technical side of it, because it's not going to go well if I get into the technical side of it, to be perfectly frank.
Okay, if you could just follow up to give us some information, fundamentally wanted to, if I can get the information as to what the energy efficiency goals are, just to understand.
Yeah, I mean, just on the surface, I mean, we're taking fuel oil boilers out of the building at the elementary school, and we're putting propane in. Those types of things are kind of larger steps, but we don't have much in the way of meat of the project that you could consider like an energy performance contract, where a contractor will come in and do this work for you. So, you know, we're putting the capital forward and making energy efficient decisions, but these systems aren't the type that are going to pay themselves off in 20 years, for instance.
Okay. Then one other quick, my last question. You mentioned the laydown areas for the work. It looks like they're on areas that are currently grass. Is that right? When the work is done,
You want to flip back
will
to
is it on grass? Or the question basically is if it's on grass or some unpaved surface. If the contractor brings the site back to its pre-construction kind of condition when they're done.
Yeah, it looks like we have a mix. We have, you know, temporary roads going in through grass areas. We obviously had some work done back here, and we had some fighting over the restoration. Every time we do a project, it's in the requirements to restore anything they touch. So it looks like there's a mix of paved and grass laydown areas. They're to protect these things, and if they don't protect them, return them to the condition that they found them, for sure.
Okay, I also want to say about energy savings and modeling. The control systems are being revamped as well as part of that. A sequence of operation, efficiencies all will be taken into account. So as much as the equipment may be not at the highest energy level, the control certainly will give you some bang for your buck, if you will, for savings.
Sure, I understand and appreciate you pointing that out. And you know, again, I understand that we don't have an unlimited budget to do every possible potential thing. Just want to make sure that it's considered to the extent that it makes sense to do it, so that we're not hopefully spending more on energy than we need to, because it is a pretty significant cost.
Right.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I have, obviously, to piggyback on Jay's stuff is maybe a little bit more detailed. I understand you say we're looking at the target. We actually haven't talked about the target. When you mentioned about decent longevity, that sounds like a very broad statement. So, like with the boilers, and I understand the gentleman had mentioned we have a hold off for 2025 because mechanical equipment, you know, it takes a long lead time, that kind of stuff. I'd be very, how do I say, to make sure Mr. Outram and our building services, when we're talking about energy efficiency, to make sure that we don't just pick a system that we don't have local support within the state. Not only with gas-fired burners, the boilers, the HVAC components, not just to select them and put them in, but maybe it's something that, you know, we can communicate to make sure our building systems have, you know, sometimes these systems don't have a local state representative, so you have to bring somebody in that it's not just selected where we don't have decent support. So with that said, on the energy efficiency, like with the boilers, it would be nice to know, just going from oil to propane is a benefit. I understand. Just upgrading an old system to a new system, you're getting a higher return on fuel that's actually turned into a visible BTU heat, you know, that kind of stuff. However, with that, I don't know if we're trying to go to like modulating type technology with the boilers or the older type. Sometimes it's like what Jay says, sometimes it's good to target something, not just a generic that we can. I know you have the controls, but we also got to make sure that the system can enable the controls in order to, if we decide later on that we can take advantage of that efficiency instead of being bottlenecked right now. Even so, because we do have the lead time, I think we should take advantage of that time, and especially talk with Rich or our building people to make sure they have the proper support, and it's not just a one-off system that maybe is put in, that at least they can come up to speed quick and have the support they need, so we can maintain not only spare parts, that we don't say take a system that you can only get system components from over the pond or over in Germany, and then we're laid up and we have issues here. So that's what I would like to make it, ensure we take care of.
Yeah, what you're touching upon is a very big deal. We want systems that can be easily maintained and maintained into the future cost effectively and quickly. And I don't think I'm lying to say that Mr. Outram has been sort of part of the conversation and involved in an integral part of dictating those things. Again, I go back to the fact that we have a public bid with competition. We're going to scrutinize to the full legal extent any systems that we believe would cause those kinds of problems, because that's not what we want to deliver here for the district as far as the systems, because it's, like I said, it's critical what you're touching on.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry, it's my first time kind of seeing some of this stuff, so I'm a newbie. The propane tank that's being put in, and I'm assuming obviously you guys have considered like where it is in relation to the children and stuff, but with one eye on the future and the EV implementation and having to put in all of those chargers and all of the equipment for the buses, are there any parameters there? Are we going to see any issues based off of where that looked like it was on the mapping?
It hasn't been easy to locate the propane tank because space is limited, and the codes dictate how far they need to be away from buildings and other objects. So I believe we found a good compromise in its location that is not hurting anything and is not actually conflicting with anything that exists. I don't foresee issues with this location regarding what you might be doing with EVs. I think it's in a pretty remote area of your site that's really kind of been developed out to its full extent already. So we're taking the last corner of the property that hasn't been used essentially and putting it there. If we're wrong or if there's an issue, it's been moved around, I'll say, in the last several months, and we can continue to find the right answer. But right now, it's following the path of least resistance. There's few options.
Can you give me an approximate, like, I'm trying to picture it in my head, and then in the map, it was up there, but like, there's the fencing, there's the fields. Where are we?
You had it.
It's essentially the corner of it.
Below the playground on the elementary school.
Right.
Behind the cap on the slight slope that leads up towards the playground.
And there's still space there between the area where we're putting it and any parking that's been added to the bus garage. And really the only signs that you'll know that it's there are gonna be bollards so that nobody drives or parks something on it, but you won't see anything.
Any other questions? Thank you. We greatly appreciate the update, and we understand it's kind of a moving target for that, but it's quite encouraging that we are moving towards the next step, which getting SCD approval and then being able to go out for bids. Fabulous.
You're welcome. The last slide and I think the one after it is, so we were asked for some better visualizations of how the additions looked, so that's for your reference. Very much tying both additions into the fabric of the existing building, so it's not gonna be like an added on eyesore. It's really gonna, the idea is that it blends in and you believe it was there this whole time.
I think that's the challenge with any renovation, so that it looks like, oh, that old thing. Great, thank you very much, we appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to move us on to the capital component, where we will be discussing the administration component and revenue. So with that, shall I turn it over to you, Mike, or shall I turn it over to you, Todd? All right, start with Mike. Todd pointed. Did you see that? No.
No. Yes, I will start us off, but as you can imagine, Todd has been knee-deep in this for months, really going back as early as November to really begin this process as we start to take a look at budget, as we roll out budget number 3. As Tracy alluded to, our administrative and capital component piece of the budget you'll see tonight, along with some revenue numbers. So a couple of the early slides that we will talk about are just kind of a reminder of connecting what we're doing here as a Board of Education as a district with our fiscal planning and connecting it to our missions and goals. We felt it's very important that we don't lose sight of this, hence it's been part of each one of our presentations to this point. The next slide is really that budget timeline. You'll see the heavy gray area that marks this March meeting, which will again be, we'll go over the administrative and the capital component, but we'll also continue to have, we're still waiting, as you can imagine, on information from the state in regards to where we're at with state aid. We should be getting more information. Things have been moving quick. They'll be moving probably not quick enough for us to be able to get everything we need prior to an adoption of a budget, but we'll have a better understanding out of Albany how things are going. So the other pieces to this that we'll continue to have some conversation around this evening will be tax levy, and again, as our administrative team has been doing, is continue to review priorities within relations to the budget decisions. The budget development decision points, we highlighted these kind of individually in the beginning of this process, but all 3 of these decision points will be part of tonight's discussion as we talk about managing different aspects of the budget and the budget development. We'll continue to review our current programming and discussion around tax levy increases, and then some questions and conversation around fund balance will be part of our revenue discussion towards the end of the presentation. So at this point, I will hand off to Todd and let him pick it up from there.
Thanks, Mike. So, I help if I have our presentation up. Give me a second. There we go. So our budget construction formula, this is also a slide that we've shown each time. You'll see tonight we have the rollover budget over on the left, which is where we started this back in January, but then everything else over to the right, budget priorities, budget modifications, revenue, and then the use of fund balance are all grayed out because that really now, all those things are in play. All those are parts of the process that we're currently looking at. So we're going to focus on the work that we've done since last week, but also add in the revenue piece tonight as well. So tonight, the different areas that we'll touch on, as was already said, the capital component and the administrative component. So New York State requires school districts to break our budget proposals into those 3 different components. Last week was the program component that we shared. This week is the capital and the administrative. We'll also touch on revenues, and then we'll also spend a little time talking about where the budget currently stands. So updates from last week to this week. A lot has happened in the course of 7 days. and where the budget currently stands. And then last, we'll look at some upcoming dates between now and the vote that happens in May. Before I go on to the next slide and get into the capital component, also just want to mention that in terms of the supporting documents, so tonight's presentation, we have the slide deck as one documentation, or one document rather, and then we have a supporting document for each of the different areas. So capital component has its own supporting document, administrative component, revenue, and then preliminary budget. So each one of those has its own supporting document. On any of the slides where you see supporting document and reference a page, that page is in the specific component that it's in. So just kind of orienting you to the different resources that we're looking at tonight. So capital component. So we'll start tonight with the capital component. As a reminder, this includes buildings and grounds, judgment and claims, debt service for bus purchases and serial bonds and bans, as well as interfund transfer for capital. So we're gonna turn it over to Rich to talk about, on the buildings and grounds side, specifically in his realm, some of the areas of increase for this coming year.
Good evening. First we'll go over the equipment budget. The proposed budget is $52,000. That's $27,000 increase, which is a 108.42% increase. That's to replace the 2009 pickup truck. Contractual expenses, $853,000. That's up $52,970, which is a 6.62% increase. One of the main reasons for the increase there is the sewer and water prices have skyrocketed, so we're paying for that. Materials and supplies, $74,255. We kept that steady this year, so it's a 0% increase. And the last is our BOCE services, which is $50,628, which is a $11,426 increase, which is 29.15% increase. This increase we will get, I believe it was 61.6% of that back from BOCES next year. So the overall budget is $1,030,033, which is a $91,446 increase, which is a 9.7% increase. Is there any questions on that?
So Rich, if I remember correctly, when we switched over to the new risk management company, then it was kind of net. It was the same price once you factored in the aid. Am I remembering it correctly? Ballpark.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was around the same price.
Okay.
Any other questions for Rich? The other piece I'll just mention on this slide, connecting back to last week when Mary presented for transportation, we pointed out that the equipment line in transportation had decreased. It was actually $28,780. So while this looks like a significant increase on the B&G side, it's actually all intentional, right? Trying to keep the total amount of equipment in those two areas consistent so that we're on a constant cycle of replacing items that need to be replaced. So just want to point that out, that it connects back to what we talked about last week.
And then the question for the sewer increase, that's driven by the town, so we do not have any control. Is that an accurate statement?
That's correct.
That is correct.
Okay.
I have a question. In page 3 of the supporting document, on the bottom where it says buildings and grounds totals, I have a different, it looks like the numbers all match, but the increase in the percentages are different.
I have the same issue.
So the percentage?
So it is pulling, the number for the proposed is correct. What is off is actually what the current year budget is, 23-24. Those are the two numbers that don't match.
Okay.
So I would just have to check to see which one is the correct one. I don't know off the top of but the actual proposed, that is correct, because it matches in both. Thank you, Rich. Moving on to some other areas in the capital component. This is a short and quick one. There's judgment of claims and refund of property taxes. This is two areas of the budget that we are looking to keep exactly the same, so 0 increase for next year.
The next piece is the cost for our SRO, and the work that Dustin does for us through Greene County Sheriff's Department. Dustin continues to be, and this program continues to be an integral part of our K-12 programming, both in the buildings as well as being part of our safety team and in our drills and things like that that we do on a regular basis. So these are the numbers for the continued service for that program.
Like, is that just part of his salary? Is that what that is?
That is correct. If that's what we pay out of for that service.
Mike, do we anticipate that going up every year?
I'm sure, just much like any other contract with employees, if Dustin is the right fit for us and through the Greene County Sheriffs, as long as he continues to be in that role, he makes more money. If for whatever reason he no longer feels it's the right fit, or we don't feel it's the right fit, we may get someone else at a lesser rate based on years of service.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Mike,
Yep.
remember, are we just told what his salary is, or is there a negotiation?
It's an agreed upon contract that we have with Greene County Sheriffs. It's
Yeah, okay. I couldn't remember. I still remember it's a multi-year contract that says it will increase by a certain amount each year. Do you know?
we get a new contract every year for him that the board approves.
I remember approving it. I just can't remember if we do it every year or.
Yeah, yep, every year.
In August.
Okay, thank you.
And I think kind of to that point, the increase, we're not sitting here negotiating the increase. This is the increase and here is the new contract. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct.
Take it or leave it, right?
You said it, not me.
And I have a question with the RSO. I know at Mondays, or at the last meeting, when Joe came up and communicated, he had brought up that the RSO is also utilized for something like a special education or something sought after for communicating to some of the younger kids as like a mentor, that kind of thing. I guess I question what the main purpose for the RSO to be here. If they're being utilized in other areas, then maybe there's gaps where the original intent that they're on our facility. But, correct me if I'm wrong, but they did mention that he was being utilized in an area at the elementary school as almost like a mentor, something for the children.
And I apologize, I can't speak to what was brought up at the last meeting, but I can tell you that as part of the SRO program, building relationships across the board is a big part of the effectiveness of the SRO program. So using Dustin, as we encourage all our faculty and staff at some point to be able to make connections with kids, to build relationships, it's an important part of what we do. And Dustin is no different than whether it's a teacher, a TA, one of our building's ground staff, food service, bus drivers. Students connect with who they connect with, and sometimes it is our SRO. And so we are able to utilize Dustin in a way sometimes with certain kids who respond to the relationship that he's built with them to help either de-escalate an issue or to just partner up and buddy when the student's having a kind of a rough day. So that kind of is part and parcel with the use of the SRO. I'm not sure if someone else can speak to what was brought up at the last meeting in regards to his usefulness or his work here on campus.
I got the impression more that the point was being made that he's making connections with kids who it's been tough to make some connections with. Not necessarily that he's being utilized outside of his role, but that it's an extra layer.
Okay, I understand that. I just, sometimes I think our role shifts and changes in the original intent for that role. I would like to see, you know, I'm not sure if he's doing like reading classes or, I'm not saying he's doing all this stuff, but obviously the original impact of him being here is for, you know, a safety, security measure. Could be a great guy. I just don't want to see, obviously, the focus or his perception, you know, maybe being utilized in a way that maybe the original intent is not being taken care of. And that's because, I'm just saying because other people have brought it up to me, so I'm expressing it. So, which, the relationships are a great thing to have with the young children. It's just a concern I have.
Right, I think the way that I look at it is it's kind of, the role has two elements to it, and one being preventative. And so part of the way that it is preventative is by having that relationship. So obviously to prevent or anticipate or just, if students are comfortable showing something to the SRO, then that can prevent something. So that's where it's not something that to me is very cut and dry. It's all about relationships in addition to having a presence, being there, and so forth. Maybe Jim, to your point, Mike, just kind of checking in, and what does Dustin feel? Does he have any suggestions?
Yeah, I think it's important that if you go around and you look at research or any of the other school districts that are implementing a true SRO program, it is really more about what you had just said, Tracy. It's about building connections. You know, student safety and safety here at school is a big part of what he does, but it is really more of a preventative piece in which he plays a big role in. We try to, our building principals try not to utilize them as law enforcement as much as we can, because again, we have more ability to work with kids and be able to help kids through certain issues. Obviously, when law enforcement's needed or desired for either students or parents, Dustin becomes part of that, becomes part of his job. But again, I think any good school resource officer program is really a balance of building relationships, being seen, being visible, being integrated into the school district, as well as, you know, being there as a safety law enforcement as well.
I think that's good. Just for feedback, just, you know, obviously when we originally instituted this, it was a new thing, new program. Obviously it's growing, it's a liquid system, but we're getting other benefits. And it's nice to get feedback that it's actually contributing towards preventative, not only for encouraging, you know, kids to communicate, but instead of just a physical presence. So I think that feedback's important for us to go out and maybe, you know, Dustin is a name, it's not just a person or an entity, he's actually coexisting and, you know, I guess changing each year, and you're getting new ideas from that relationship. So, you know, I support that.
So our next slide is our inter-fund transfer capital component budget proposal. Last year, you remember, we had put in into this budget line $125,000 extra to kind of help us through the final stages of the dust collector project. So you'll see that was put in there for 23-24 school year. This year we're not anticipating putting any money into that line because we do have the capital project going on, and we felt as though that while we're showing a decrease here in this line, there will be, that money will be used to help offset as we increase our debt service line that is coming on. As the project is starting, that money will be able to be used to offset some of that cost.
So that leads into our debt service. So this slide shows the principal and interest of the existing loans that the school has for both bus purchases as well as capital work. So the aid ratio for building age, just as a reference point, is 70.3%. And the increase in the band interest is for the start of our large project. So as Mr. Bennett mentioned, the 125 inter-fund transfer to capital came out of that budget line, but it will be going into or supporting this increase of $400,000 that is the band interest payment that we look to be responsible for during the 24-25 school year because of that large capital project starting. The other variations are just within our current loans. The variations at different points in time fluctuate up and down, but try to keep it steady overall. So really the significant increase here is just that band interest for the capital project.
Todd, that band interest line, do you know how that will look in the future of the capital project? I mean, are we looking at about this level consistently for a period of years, or more or less?
So if you look at it from a perspective of that total debt service number, the idea is to keep that as stable or steady as possible. So this year, while the number is increasing by that 425, 125 of that is coming, again, from that other budget line we just mentioned. When we get into the revenue side of things, you'll see a transfer of $205,000 from an interest reserve that we have specifically set aside for capital projects. That's interest earned on borrowing from previous projects. So those two numbers help bring that $400,000 down a little bit. Not a little bit, a significant amount. But overall, if you look from this year to next year, that total number should be fairly consistent. That's with our fiscal advisors trying to make sure we keep on that steady plateau so we don't have those ups and downs in this line. So that's it for the capital component. So you can set aside that supporting document, and the next section up is the administrative component of the budget. So just again, for this component, the third and final component is the administrative component. This includes the salaries for professional staff who spend 50% or more of their time in administration and supervision. So that's usually what people think of as administrative. But it's also important to remember other things fall into this category, including clerical staff related to those positions, central printing, curriculum development and research, planning and evaluation, central data processing, tax collection, and a variety of different BOCE services all come into this category of administrative component. So in this area, we have again the contractual materials and supplies and BOCE services. So I'm just going to touch on the increases and the cause for the increases in each of these areas. So for contractual, we have an increase of $20,820, which is 5.31%. This increase is a result of our insurance policies or liability and multi-peril insurance that we have on the district, just increasing from year to year. For materials and supplies, the majority of this increase of $5,000, which is 10.94%, this budget line actually purchases the copy paper that is used throughout the entire district. So there is an increase in cost for copy paper, as well as postage falls into that category as well. And then the third main category here, BOCE services, the increase of $26,720 or 4.62%. This includes our employee assistance program, which is purchased through BOCES. We've purchased that for the past couple of years through stimulus funds. This is shifting it into the general fund with the stimulus fund ending, so part of the increase is that. And then the rest of the increase in that area comes from just annual increases on the BOCE side of things, including the BOCES administrative fee, which is a fee they tack on to a variety of different services that they provide, all fall under this category. And then there's also some specific programs. So Envision or Finance Manager, which is the program that we use in the business office to manage all these lovely spreadsheets that you see and receive. That program gets purchased through this line. There's an increase to that cost year to year. Another quick example is AptaG, which is the program we use for our website and notification system, falls in this category as well, and there's also increases in that.
And Todd, for the administrative charges, do we get reimbursed for all of BOCES services, or some yes, some no? How does that work?
Do you mean, do we get the aid rate back
Aid
on
rate,
service
yes.
fees? Good question. I believe so, but I would have to check to be 100% sure. Any service we do, I don't know about the actual administrative fee that we pay. But I
Yeah,
can
I was
double
curious
check.
about that, since it is increasing 4.43%. Okay.
I believe the answer is yes, but I will check to be 100% sure. Okay. So shifting gears to the next section of tonight, which is the revenue. So shifting to the revenue, this is the part where we talk about how we're going to fund all these things that we've been talking about in all these different presentations. So as you know, the two main significant sources of revenue for the school district are state aid and then local property taxes. So at this point, if you look at this pie chart, you'll see that the state aid comes in at 42.08%, and our real estate taxes currently would come in at 51.8%. So roughly you put those together, and approximately 94% of the total revenue side of the budget comes from those two areas. So we're going to spend some time looking at those two areas and then touch on the others as well. This is a more detailed breakdown of the different categories of revenue. This includes all of our different areas and has a total projected revenue for 24-25 of $35,986,371, which is an increase of $1,758,600, or 5.14%. And because, as I mentioned, those two main categories, state aid and local taxes, we're going to dig into those two areas for a little bit more detail. So starting on the state aid side, history of state aid. So this chart shows 5 years of data for Greenville School District and the total amount that we've received in state aid in each of those years. So using the estimated state aid figures for 24 and 25, there is an increase of $989,962, or 7% increase from this current year, 23-24, to next year, 24-25. But certainly you can see the graph. Each year, our state aid overall has increased over that 5-year period. So the state aid proposal, we received the governor's executive proposal. So what's on the screen currently, this is what came through that executive budget proposal. Some of the other state aid categories are expense-driven aids. Those I actually go through and recalculate because as a district, we have more up-to-date, kind of stronger data to use to predict what those expenditure-driven aids will be. So for example, transportation. I go through and actually at this point in years, so I did this past week, we have a pretty good understanding between now and the end of the year what our total cost will be for transportation over the course of this year. That number is what's used to determine what our projected aid will be next year. We can do that with more accuracy locally than what the state does on their end early in January when the executive budget then comes out. So that's the distinction between some of these numbers are a little bit more firm and locked in from early on, and some have some more flexibility in shifting and changing as we go. It's really those expenditure-driven aids that we want to make sure we review current year expenditures to predict as succinctly as we can for what next year's aid will be. But back to this slide, this shows the numbers that came in that executive budget, what we saw for our proposed revenue for next year. This chart takes that same information. So the column that is shaded, it's a little light up there, but it's the first column of numbers. It's shaded in, says 24-25 proposed executive budget. You can then see our current year budget, 23-24, and then what I've worked on or we've worked on for the proposed for 24-25. So And for expense-driven aids, we were able to predict with more accuracy using our local data. And we're gonna again dig into a specific area here, which is the foundation aid. So the most significant percentage of our state aid comes from what is called foundation aid. So foundation aid is one piece of state aid. And these terms I know get thrown around and people hear aid in different terms. Just to be clear, state aid includes a variety of different categories. Foundation aid is one of those categories, but it's the largest and most significant for us as a district. So last week at our board meeting, there was some conversation regarding the increase around foundation aid. So I thought it would be beneficial to take a little time tonight in the actual revenue presentation to look more closely at our foundation aid. So there are a variety of different factors or variables that go into the formula that the state uses to calculate this aid. For the purposes of tonight, the simplistic version of foundation aid is the formula that you see up on the screen. So we're going to work through this formula. The state uses two numbers. Important side note, even these two numbers have various variables that feed into them, but these two numbers is what we're going to look at and do a little history review of what these numbers have been for Greenville. So these two numbers are per pupil amount, which is the amount the state designates each district receive per pupil in that district. So this number is affected by the wealth of a district's community. So if a district is more needy, this number increases at a higher rate. Okay? So this is where there's a connection between the wealth of a community and the amount of foundation aid that a district receives. It's reflected in that per pupil amount. The other number in the formula is the total aidable foundation pupil units. Fun term. The acronym for that is TAFPU, which also sounds kind of fun, right? So TAFPU. So any reference tonight to TAFPU is this total aidable foundation pupil units. Another way of thinking about that, it's a weighted pupil count. So we get a count for every student that we have in the district, and then special education students, with the understanding that more resources are utilized to educate certain students, special ed students, we have additional enrollment numbers added to our count to get this weighted number. So it's not a true enrollment number, it's a weighted enrollment number. So again, this gets really complicated and a lot of different variables go into it, but in the simplest way, this formula is we as a district get a certain amount per pupil, and then we have this count, or weighted pupil count, the two numbers get multiplied together, and that is our foundation aid. So again, this is what I was trying to explain last week when the question came up. Thought a quick visual and graphic would serve us well to kind of revisit it.
And Todd, just to kind of clarify, the governor goes through and adjusts the elements that go into the TAFPU. I'm not going to say that word. Total aidable foundation pupil units.
So this year in the governor's proposal, what she was tweaking was what TAFPU or what weighted count a district gets credit for.
Okay.
In recent years, there has been basically this idea of hold harmless, meaning that if an enrollment went down, the district's enrollment and the weighted pupil count went down, rather than use the formula, which would result in their total aid going down, they were basically, okay, we're gonna keep you at this same level, roughly. The governor's proposal came out and said, nope, we wanna actually hold you to your true weighted pupil count multiplied by your per pupil amount, which is why you hear of some districts that had a significant decrease in their state foundation aid because their enrollment has slightly declined over time.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a different situation, which we'll actually get to that in a slide or two. But for the purpose of 24-25, using this idea, using this formula, our per pupil amount set by the state is $7,693.59. Our weighted pupil count was 1,352 pupils. Multiply them together, and you get the 10,401,000, which is our foundation aid. Questions about that? So to look at each one of these just a little closer, there's some other variables that go into it. So again, throwing out a lot of terms, but hopefully these slides, you can certainly refer back to them, or if you have questions, you can ask now. There's another term, the foundation aid state sharing ratio. So this is a number that the higher the number, the higher our per pupil amount. This is where, again, the wealth piece comes in. So a district that has greater financial needs has a higher sharing ratio, meaning the state picks up or state contributes more to that district's foundation aid. So this, I went back, I thought, okay, so we've had a lot of conversation this year, or at least as I've learned and looked into this, a lot of conversation about this current year, 23-24, and then looking at the projected 24-25. So you can see this FASSR, or this ratio for Greenville, is going from 0.518 to 0.524. So that means that's an increase in that number, meaning we're gonna have an increase at a little higher rate to our per pupil amount. If you look back just over 5 years, you can see in 21-22 and 22-23, we were actually at an even higher level of this foundation aid sharing ratio. So just to kind of give you context over 5 years to see where we've been, this actual year, 23-24, was actually a little dip down, and now it's going back up slightly.
Is this driven entirely by financial need, or are there other inputs to it?
This comes from other factors known as the wealth index that feed into this, that are made up of the income of a district, so like income tax returns of those living within our district, as well as property values that all get fed into this formula. But then the state has multiple ways that they calculate this, and then they pick the highest one for the district. So there's multiple ways of coming up with it, and the highest one is what is assigned to the district, which is in the district's favor. But yes, this number is coming from variables that are related to the wealth of the district.
Okay.
This is not something we calculate, this is a number we're given.
Correct. This is all calculated at the state level, out there for anybody to look and review multiple years, but it is given to us or assigned to each district. Yes. Right, so that leads into, again, the per pupil amount. So this shows each year over 5 years, this is a nice steady increase to our per pupil amount. And the other piece of that formula, as I was...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but...
No, go ahead.
Never mind. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, never mind, thanks.
Yeah, Jim.
I have a question, because from last year to this year, we dropped from the FASSR, for that financial needs. However, our stated per pupil amount went up from the one year to the next. So our financial needs went down, but so this way, how do we go up?
Good question. So one, that ratio didn't change drastically, right? Which it wouldn't. Something crazy would have to happen to make that change drastically one year to the next. The other piece is per pupil amount is in recent years has always trended up regardless of that ratio. If that ratio goes higher, it just means the increase from one year to the next would be even greater. So for example, I don't know for sure because I don't have the full formula to plug this in, but say our ratio didn't change at all this year, from this year to next year, if it just stayed the same as it was this year, maybe the projection for next year wouldn't be 76.94, maybe it would be 75.94, right? It would be just a little lower number. But overall, yeah, we're gonna get more per pupil each year because costs increase, right? The total amount of aid across the state increases every year. It's just how it's all divvied up. But good point, yep. So the other piece of that formula, as I said, were the pupil counts. So again, back to TAFBU. How many times can I say TAFBU tonight? So this shows that TAFBU, which is the weighted enrollment, as well as a true enrollment. So this was a question that was asked last week too, of looking at multiple years of enrollment data. So this does show that. However, the little disclaimer I want to put on there is that this data is always delayed. So I have this labeled at the bottom, state aid year. This is not true enrollment by year because it's delayed from year to year. our current aid this year is based on enrollment in previous years. So this is for that aid year, this is the enrollment number that was used. So for this current year, the enrollment number was 1,068, but the weighted, or the TAFBU, which is always a higher number because you have those additional kind of points awarded because of special ed students, was 1,284. So this again is an area, yes, we can see from this year to projected for next year, 24-25, we see that number going in a positive direction. It's always a good thing, right? Increased enrollment is a good thing for a district. But we can also compare it to years previous. So we're getting closer to where we were back in 2021, but still lower than we were, back to where we similar where we were in 2021. So this current year was kind of that little dip, but we're trending back up.
So, as far as the enrollment counts, are they K-12? So the pre-K does not count for us?
Pre-K does not count in this number because pre-K has a whole separate funding source of grants that come through federal. So for this purpose, pre-K does not count as a pupil count. Good question. All right, so just again, coming back to this slide, the formula per pupil times the weighted or the TAFBU gives us our foundation aid. So I hope this was helpful based on last week's conversation. I thought it'd be good to kind of put together, this is the formula, but also looking at multiple years of data to see the context within, yes, we might see in certain areas increase or decrease from this year to next year, but where does that fit in kind of a larger 5-year time period? So if we look at foundation aid over time, again, I pulled 5 years worth of data. The gray colored line here shows the state aid formula. So if this starts in 2021, if each year we received what the formula said we should receive as a district, that is the number that is in gray, that gray line. If you've heard in the news or following along with education in New York State, you've heard a lot in recent years about getting schools to be on formula. So if you look at like 2021, we were not on formula, meaning we were not receiving from the state the total amount that the formula said we should receive. And that was because each year the state made adjustments based on how much they had to fund education, and those numbers were always coming in lower. Okay? This current year, 23-24, was the first year that the state made that commitment and worked towards it and made it happen for this year that schools are on formula. So that's where you see that gray line and the red line come together in that one data point for this current school year. And then you'll see the projected out for next year, that 10,401,000, which is what came from the formula that we just walked through.
Is it possible that part of the adjustment and the whole safe being eliminated is driven by this?
Driven by people getting onto formula and
Right,
the
so
total
if we
cost
had a
overall?
gap, right, and all of a sudden then it's reduced, we have to create a gap another way. So in effect, that's what the governor has done.
Yes, but you also have to remember there's also districts that have been the flip. So if you have a district who enrollment has decreased, their actual state aid formula has been showing you should receive this much and they were receiving more. Right, because their TAFBU was actually pulling their numbers down, but the state was saying, well, hold harmless, we're gonna keep you up at this higher level because we don't wanna take money away from schools. So there are districts that this graph could look the reverse. Thankfully, that's not us in terms of like where we're projected to go. But Tracy, all the things that happen in the state, I will refrain from comment. Right, so that leads into where are we currently with our revenue. Based on the conversation that we had last week and the input that was given to us from the board, we have aimed at 2.5% tax levy I'll get into, when we're done with the revenue side, we'll get into some of the adjustments that have been made in the budget overall from last week to this week and where we stand in terms of appropriating for that 2.5% increase, which is still well within the tax cap limit, which was 3.17. So this graph just shows 5 years of data of our tax levy percent increase. So that's the percentage increase of how much we are collecting from taxpayers in the community. This is the same chart on the right, just showing it in number form, seeing the increase over 5 years, total amount collected for tax levy. So the bottom right corner shows that for next year, the proposed as of it stands right now, the real estate taxes or tax levy would be $18,642,669, which is an increase of $454,699 or 2.5%. So that's where that 2.5 comes into play. Any questions? I'm going to move on to local revenue, but before I do, any questions about state aid, foundation aid?
No, I appreciate, you sharing it. I think that it was very helpful to kind of see a big picture, and this is one of the years where it seems like there have been a lot of changes, so it does help us understand it, shall we say.
Thanks. Yep. There's definitely been more conversation this year, I feel, around foundation aid because of the potential shifts and changes in some districts that are in very challenging situations, and thankfully that's not us, at least in regards to the foundation aid piece. So the last, back up for a second. So those are the two main categories of revenue, right? The tax levy and then the state aid. Everything else I put into this category of local revenue that includes a variety of different areas. Just to touch on a couple of them, the first one is fund balance. So you see here, this was also a question last week that I didn't have at the ready, so you can see here our fund balance, what was included in this current year, 23-24, and what's projected or proposed for 24-25 is remaining the same. So as a reminder, the fund balance is revenue that is pulled in from the previous school year. So it's funds in this current year budget, 23-24 budget, that would be pulled into the 24-25 budget for the purpose of revenue. Then some other topics in this area, we have pilots. So payment in lieu of taxes, those payments come into this area. We have a slight increase in that area. Health insurance refund and refunds from Questar OCs come into this area. And then we also have, just to highlight, tuition from other districts. So this is also some of the conversation last week of programs that we have here on campus at Greenville, where students from other districts come to our school for our programs. We have a projected revenue, and we increase this based on students coming to us to $325,000 for next year. Sorry, I jumped around a little bit. I wasn't going in order as I planned. Another one just to mention is interest on deposits. So this is, we work with banks to make sure that the money that we have on hand at any given time, we are earning the best interest rates that we can. So certainly in the past couple of years, we've seen interest rates increase in a positive way. So we were able to increase this line from what was budgeted in this current year up by $85,000, which is a significant increase, but well within what we see as potential revenue for next year. And then the last one just to touch on is the last one in the list, so the intra-fund transfer. This is what I mentioned earlier. This is a reserve account that has money that was earned from interest on money that we borrowed during a project. So I know that sounds a little crazy, but okay, so we borrow money for the purpose of conducting a project like a capital project. While we have that money, we're not spending it all at once. We borrow the money and then we're paying it out as we use it. In the time that we're holding that money, we put it in an account that it earns interest. That interest, because it was earned on a capital account, has to be used for the purpose of a capital, in this case, capital project. So we have that money that every time we do a project, some interest is earned and it's gone into that account. In the building of this current capital project that is starting in 24-25, our financial advisors had this worked in all along as this is the time and the place to use debt or use some of that money for the purpose of offsetting the increase the first year that we're gonna take on that van interest payment. So that 205,000 is that very last line under revenue. That's kind of revenue that we have on hand. We're just pulling it from that reserve and putting it into the revenue for next year's budget.
And that interest was the 400,000 we saw earlier.
That's correct. That'll be the interest that we have to pay out
Correct.
next year, correct.
Todd, what would be under miscellaneous? What is miscellaneous revenue?
So miscellaneous.
School board salaries.
So miscellaneous. The one I know off the top of my head, and there's others in there, but the one that's coming to mind, we get a refund from BOCES each year. So BOCES does its best, to its best ability, predicts expenditures and what districts pay for all the services that they provide. Based on those services that we purchase through Questar at the end of the year, where we have fund balance, and I'm not gonna pretend to know how Questar manages its budget, but it's different than what districts can do. They have to give that money back to districts. So each year we have a set amount that, oh, this is the amount that we have coming back. So that's one of those areas that just this past week, I got that number from our BOCES saying, hey, this is how much Greenville can expect to receive as a refund in 24, 25. There are other numbers in there too, Kelly, that I can look and let you know specifically, but that's the one that I know off the top of my head.
And Todd, what is the private school related services, since this is a revenue?
So
One after miscellaneous.
Yep. This is, so we have Greenville School within our school district. So when a student from Caro sends a student to Greenville, Greenville is actually responsible for providing the health services for a private school in our physical district jurisdiction. So we then bill Caro or other districts who have students there and earn that back as revenue.
Right, and there are contracts for that?
Correct.
that we
Yep, the
approved.
board
Thank
sees,
you.
yep, exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Microphone's on now. So the tuition from other districts, so that's students from other districts coming in for this special education program. Do we figure out what the cost for that service is and charge the cost?
We
Or
do.
it's just, we charge our cost, it's not a profit?
We charge the specific cost of that student in the program that they're assigned to. So it can be very different from one student to another depending on that program. So just as a quick example, an 811, which is 8 students, 1 teacher, 1 TA, well, there's fewer students in that program, so that typically is gonna be a more expensive program than a 1211, because you can have up to 12 students. But for each of those students that we have students coming into our programs, we have a process at Greenville that is well established, thankful to my predecessors, of determining for that program what are the staffing costs, what are the benefit costs, but then it's also specific to that student need. So it could be that student has a very specific additional service of speech services. We figured out how much does that cost to provide that student those services.
So if we, I don't know which services we have, let's just say we have a 1211, 811, and I think it's, I heard we'd be like, say, a 411. If all those, 24 spots are filled, does that mean we're at capacity? If someone wants to come in from another district, we have to say no? Or, I'm just trying to understand like kind of how, what drives, enrollment might not be the right word, participation in the programs, if we're simply reactive and have to take anyone who wants to come in, or are we capped at some level?
So we are capped. Those numbers are the numbers of the students in those programs. This is where if Brooke was here, I would certainly be deferring to Brooke right now, but she spoke a little bit last week of, she works with the other directors in the region to, and they're doing this more and more to try to determine where are the greatest needs and what programs can different districts maybe work on developing. We have been, kudos to Greenville, we have been on the forefront of that as a local district, building those programs and inviting others. Hey, we've built this program, you have needs, and as a neighboring district, we welcome you. Let's look at your student. Does it meet the criteria or the profile of the student in this program? Working through that, but certainly 811, when it gets to 8 students, we're good.
We don't open up a new 811 and say, okay, you're now one and we have 7 more spots. It's just, we need to work with you to find some other, okay.
I mean, it's also, and this is a compliment to Brooke, what she has done in her role, and I can remember this, so Brooke and I started the same year at Greenville. Our first year here, Brooke did a tremendous amount of work to build those programs here and started pulling back our students that previously we had been sending out to other programs. So that work started around, this is now 11 years ago, but it started around the idea of who are our students that are out in these different programs? If we designed a program locally, who could we pull back and service here in Greenville? Because that's the ultimate goal, right? We want to keep our kids here because we want to service them. So it started with that, and it has evolved over time, constantly looking at what are the needs of the students, but making sure we're keeping our students in mind first, and then, oh, we've created this program, and there's additional seats in that program. Are there students in other surrounding districts that could come that would be interested? This would be a far better topic for Brooke to discuss than me, but I've worked with her long enough and seen it. But
You clearly know enough to talk about it. And I think for purposes of like this context, it's more than adequate. So thank you, Todd.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the revenue side?
Oh, wait, sorry. What's the last slide about special education off-campus programs and services?
I didn't get there.
Oh,
That's the next section.
sorry.
Well, it's kind of related to revenue,
I
but it was,
missed a title slide, sorry.
it was as a follow-up to last week, so let me jump to that. So this, this doesn't fall into the revenue side, it doesn't fall into capital or administrative, so I put it here as just a follow-up from the last meeting. This was another question that was asked in regards to special ed programming, so it does fit nicely in the conversation we were just having. Over time, what has been the total cost of special education off-campus programs and services? So the reverse of what we were just talking about on the revenue side, this is for students that we don't have programs for, can't service them here on campus, and they are going to another program, either a private institution or through Quest Our BOCES or another school district that has a program that can service that student. So while we had a lot of conversation last week of from this current year, 23-24, to next year, 24-25, there being a significant increase from one year to the next. Again, good place to kind of look at history. If we go back to 21-22, we also had a high point in that school year at 1.6. But kind of went up, went back down, and now is going back up, just to kind of see the trend. This is more than 5 years, but over time in that cost of that expenditure.
And Todd, do those costs include transportation?
Good question. This does not include transportation. This is just for the program itself.
And transportation is significant. Okay.
Transportation is a whole other, yes, correct.
This is,
I think this is obvious what you said, but I'll ask anyway. I mean, I understand these are students in our district that we need to service or provide a service for. Like, I get that, have no issue with it. Just wanting to understand that to the extent that these costs, change year to year, whether it goes up $500,000 from this year to next or the other direction, we're essentially just reacting to whatever the needs of the students at the time are, right? We can't actively manage, we can't say yes, no, more or less. It's just, this is what you need, this is the cost to us, and whatever happens to be in the district at that particular year, that the cost is what it is. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say so. Yep.
I would argue that, and the reason that I say that is the younger students. So in looking at the CPSE, then Brooke kind of has a handle on what are the needs coming up that we are seeing for the students that are 3 years old and so forth. And so you can use that to kind of gauge potential, just to show some of the trends. Now, obviously, then you have differences and everything else, but I think you can look at that as a gauge.
Good? Yes, okay. so that brings us to updates from last meeting as well, just a little different list. So first one on here is review and updating of revenue projections. That was a good portion of tonight's presentation, but a significant amount of work between last week and this week, with this week being the revenue presentation, going through and looking at all those specific revenue lines and where possible, adjusting them. Certainly some of those that I mentioned earlier, the expenditure driven, we want to wait as kind of late in the process as we can to do those projections, because the further we get into the year, the stronger our prediction is going to be of what are we going to spend over the course of this current year that drives the aid in the following year. So that was part one. Second part, review of stimulus positions. This is also part of that conversation that we had here last week with the board. So as an administrative team, thank you to Mrs. Hubicki that baked us cookies while we had this conversation. Oh. Now it's on public record. But we had a good conversation as an admin team last week around looking at the stimulus positions and overall thinking about if we were to reduce one position. So these positions that were started with stimulus funds, some of those we've previously worked into the budget. Others, we didn't fill positions this year with the anticipation of using those funds to support continuation of those positions. With all of that, there were still 3 that were not included in this current year budget and would be additions in the 24-25. So summary of that conversation was we feel very confident that we could reduce that overall by 1 position, and within our current staffing shift and maintain all the current programs and provide all the services we need to provide. What that exactly looks like, we're not ready to share out publicly yet, but we feel comfortable as an admin team within the structures that we have, 1 less staffing in those areas we can make work well. Are you gonna ask a question, Kevin? You look like you were getting ready to ask a question.
Do you mean you're not ready to publicly share which position?
Correct. Because there's implications of assignments and teachers, and we want to make sure we have that conversation internally and share before sharing publicly. Does that make sense? The third bullet point, review of current year funds. So we looked at within our current year budget, are there funds in some areas that we can purchase items that were requested for next year? So I'll use one very specific example. High school science department put in a request for next year to purchase new textbooks. That's a one-time purchase. It's not a reoccurring thing that would happen every year. So we have funds in this current year budget. This spring, we can purchase those textbooks this year, which means we can pull some of that money out of next year's textbook line, which overall brings down the budget for next year. So we looked through and found several areas similar to that where we can use current year funds that we have available to pull down next year's budget. So that was a reduction in the preliminary budget. And then the last one, review of requests that were additions and removed some requests. So we also went through and looked in some areas where we had a request for an increase in certain things. We reduced it back down to what they had for this current year. And that was really in supplies. A lot of things in supplies. So not a ton of money there, but going through and looking at some of those specific areas, we were able to find, okay, if we just reduce this back to this current year and looking at what those departments or areas have spent year to year, feel confident that we can do that and be okay for next year.
Todd, before moving on, would you supplement this with more detail? For example, reduce preliminary budget. If you could show us what was reduced. I mean, I guess it's probably in the supporting materials. And I did look through, I think you said the 3 - 2 column.
Yep.
That's it, okay. The review requests that were additions, removal requests, is that also, I looked at that, but not at the, like, it's harder for me to look at and say, that was a request taken out.
Right, and some of it is just, some of it could also just be adjustments as we continue to refine numbers in different areas. So yes, I can certainly share more details on some of these areas and where to look in those other supporting documents.
Thanks, and of course we'd like to better understand bullet 2, to the extent that information can be shared if possible. Thank you.
And for bullet 2, since you just kind of let the cat out of the bag, can you do it quickly? Because some people might get concerned concerned.
Todd, at this point, I know there was a lot of things where numbers weren't for sure yet, and you've gotten more information in this week. How much information is still outstanding?
Fair amount.
Fair question.
It is a fair question. A lot, so some of the things I was referring to last week were like BOCES related things. Those are definitely, the list of things that are still uncertain is getting smaller and smaller. And any one of those items, or the big ticket items, I should say, we know more firm numbers. Some of the little pieces that come from other BOCES, but those aren't huge amounts there. I might have a different answer as I'm thinking about this driving home tonight, but the one that comes to mind is health insurance. That's still the one that has the most significant number to it, that if the rates change and come down, or God forbid go up, has a stronger implication. So that one comes to mind as the one that still has a lot of, not a lot of, but unknown to it.
And I think, Kelly, what's important to also remember is until the numbers are finalized and the governor, with the legislator says, this is it, the bills are printed and everything else, our foundation aid numbers could change. If enough schools are up in arms about the hold harmless, then I don't envision them creating it out of nothing. So it's possible that it could result in other schools reducing what they're getting. So I think that the numbers look favorable for Greenville, but until they're set in stone, those numbers could change. And we could end up with revenue number, or we could end up with foundation aid that's flat. So I just caution us for that, because I think that we're still in this very nebulous time frame, and with enough schools, with the hold harmless, I do envision something's got to give, but that's my opinion.
So that brings us to big picture, where are we currently at in the budget process? And this is as of Friday afternoon on March 1st. So total revenue based on the presentation that we did tonight, $35,986,371. And then appropriations budget, which is the expenditure side, so all of the requests that we've talked about in program, administrative, and capital components, total $36,070,202. And that's leaving us with a deficit that we'd have to make up of $83,831. So certainly from last week, where the number was, I think, around 434,000 to 83 this week, that's all those pieces that I mentioned of shifting, tightening, reviewing different aspects of the budget, while we're still at a deficit overall as things currently stand, certainly in a better place than we were last week looking at the budget overall.
But I think one of the things that the board members wanted to understand was when we had indicated, okay, so say a 2.5, really understanding what does that mean, and if we were to go to 2.55 or something like that, then what could we get back? So I think that's a piece that's still missing.
But this is the original change from when we talked about 400 at the 3.17. This is the shift.
Correct.
Down, okay.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Todd,
I was just gonna ask, so is the ask to say, what does 2.55 get? What does 2.6 get?
I think that where we were at the last budget meeting, we had the 3.17 is the maximum allowed.
Yep.
And the board was not comfortable with that high number, but at the same time, kind of understanding everything, how do we prioritize? So the $483,000 that was the deficit, what was in that? Like, when we're taking away the different elements, what are we losing? Does anyone else want to jump in, or am I capturing it?
I think you mentioned on the previous slide, you had the 4 or 5 bullet points, but you couldn't talk specifically on some, but that was the main branch of what you took away in order to reduce the 400-some thousand down to 83. I think what we're looking for is the details and some of the, with the budgetary on supplies and that kind of stuff, which add up. But, you know, the big ticket items, what was possibly taken away, obviously it's one position, but you just want more details on it. Is that correct, you know, based on this slide?
So the other piece of that, yes, there were things that were taken away, but that first bullet point, just to emphasize that again, was a significant part of this. So looking at the revenue, each individual piece, and reworking and looking at those expenditure driven, there were significant increases in those areas too, that it wasn't just a cutting that got us to that that lower deficit, it was increasing revenue too. But I can certainly put together a more detailed list of like specific numbers to share with the board.
I think that, like, from my perspective, if someone, I'm having coffee at Stewart's and someone comes up to me, okay, you had an original number that was, let's say, 2 million, and now you're no longer at that. Well, how did you get that? And I can't answer that. So I need to be able to answer, this is how we got there. So that's kind of from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think again, like, all the things that we heard people wanted last week, which of those things were cut back, cut out, et cetera. That's what I want to know.
We can work on that.
I don't have one question.
Shareable format.
When does the consortium plan on locking in their price? Historically, when does it?
It's been around now, early
Yeah,
March,
that's what I thought.
so hopefully in the very near future, the next couple of weeks.
And I do understand that there is an emergency meeting coming up with the Health Insurance Consortium. My guess is probably to take a look at where we're at with things.
Mike, have you heard of any pressure? I mean, I don't like the term emergency meeting, it usually doesn't go well. Have you heard of any pressure being put on movement going up or down from other districts or within the group itself?
Within the consortium, I'm not privy to any specific information. I know that there's some question about Humana and what they're able to do, but I'm not sure if part of that is going to be the rates in what they're going to come back to districts with. So I think that that's part of the bigger piece of this switch over to Humana and you know, what some of those costs are.
So the last slide I had is just the same budget timeline to look at where we currently are and what we have left to go in this year's budget cycle. So the next budget meeting with the board is April 8th, which is scheduled as the tentative budget adoption. And then in May, we have the annual budget hearing, which is May 7th, and the budget vote, which is on May 21st.
So let me ask this, because then if we have questions to really understand the 483 down to 83, what does that represent? And our next meeting is to adopt the budget. I don't know, does everyone feel comfortable with that?
You have a meeting next week as well that we can share information.
Right.
It's not
Okay.
a budget meeting, but it's the business meetings are.
Yes,
Perfect,
exactly. I think
okay.
that's, we need to make sure we clarify that when we put it on our calendars as far as budget presentations. It's specific towards the budget, but we do have another meeting next week as a regular business meeting, but obviously we can provide more information in and around budget. We can just
there's a placeholder for a budget update already there.
I just want to say, Todd, thank you so much. This was so, getting it more than ever before. I don't know if it's because it's year 3 and I'm finally just not super confused. And also for saying task poo so many times in a straight face. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate
I would
it.
also like to thank you, Mr. Hillendorf, for the graphic on the Foundation aid formula. I found that to be quite helpful.
Excellent, thank you.
Speaking of the foundation aid,
Sorry. Do we have an idea of a time frame when we have more of a solid, I mean, I understand it's with the state, but obviously it varies our whole calculation or equation. So how drastic it is as it's changed, you know, it'd be nice to have the idea before we move forward.
I'll put my 2 cents in on that. Historically, it's been sometime in April.
Yes.
Wow, that's.
Yeah, every school district in the state right now is waiting to see how the numbers change, especially since there has been such a drastic reduction and not a urgency to hold harmless for some school districts. So there is a lot of pressure being put on an Albany right now to have people try to figure this out sooner rather than later. But we all know that things that happen over in Albany don't always move at the speed of light. So we are all being held hostage to, you know, it's been a big conversation, I'm sure, with business officials, but also with the superintendents and trying to get, you know, I think we said a month ago that we would probably be looking at having to put together a couple of different budgets, not knowing what's coming from the state. So it's not a great time.
Right, I think that, you know, ideally for one is a starting point, but if we just look at last year, I believe it was 3 weeks late, if I'm remembering it correctly. It was about 3 weeks, you know, late that, so we were looking at 15th, 17th, around there. So we can only hope that they're more familiar with it and they can do it faster.
Todd, this is more of a process or philosophical question. I was wondering, when we were beating around the numbers on the tax levy last week, and we came up, we suggested 2.5. You know, I'm wondering if, did you say, okay, what size budget would that generate? And then you said that more solid numbers came in on the revenue end, so then you got closer to that number, and then you had to start backing things out to reduce. That's where we got there, and then you found out that with those in play, we still ended up being 83. Okay.
Correct. And some
And
of
I
that,
do appreciate you answering all my questions.
Sure. Some of that is just the natural budgeting process as well, right? Each week, there's aspects that become more firm, things get clarified, we refine what we have in place. So yes, the answer to your question, Dave, is yes.
All right, well, thank you very much for a very thorough and quite helpful presentation and for going through all of our questions and so forth. So then, if everyone is comfortable, I am going to move us on, and we have the open forum. So here, please note the same, this is the closing open forum, and please note the same guidelines apply as stated during the first open forum. Is there anyone that would like to speak? And I don't think we have any emails. No. Okay. Then, if I could have a motion to adjourn the meeting, please. All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.